Hi everybody, thanks for joining us. You're watching the HEA 2023 Annual Online Conference. In just a moment, Michael and Samantha will be talking about tertiary pathways, having a little bit of a chat about some of our advocacy as well. But first, I'd like to thank HEA for sponsoring this session. HEA, it's a blend of words, happy and power, and it's a gamified life skills education program. They provide life lesson courses and mini motivational videos for years 9 and up on money, health, wellness, relationships, community, do-it-yourself, and careers. I had to read all that because there's a lot there. So check out HEA, and thanks HEA for sponsoring this one today. Hop over to our expo page. You'll be able to see all of their links to their socials, their website, happower.com. And that's about it for that one. Thank you very much. And over to you, Michael.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. And it is great to have sponsors like HEA because it costs HEA money to run the Zoom events platform, and this is a help.
Yeah.
So my name's Michael. I'm the Vice President of HEA. My kids have all finished homeschooling now, but each of them went through tertiary pathways, so it's a subject that's close to my heart, and I'm so pleased to be talking with Samantha Bryan this morning because she's our volunteer and top gun in this subject. So thank you, Sam, for joining us. Perhaps you could just start by telling us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Samantha Bryan. I've been married to my best friend Andrew for 30 years. We have 5 children ranging in age from 25 down to 15.
Okay.
The only relationship which trumps those is my relationship with Jesus as a friend and follower of his. But I will say, following on from that though I am a deeply spiritual person, I really love that the HEA is non-sectarian and open to people from all beliefs and backgrounds and philosophies. In their personal life and in their homeschooling. So I love that diversity that we have within our organisation. I've been a bookworm since I was a child, so I have an abiding love for stories and words. Thankfully, I've balanced that out in the past decade or so by an increased love of walking and hiking, so I'm not just a little couch potato sitting there with my book all day.
All right.
Yeah, I'm perennially curious about the world, so I love to learn all sorts of things, and I'm a people person.
Oh, good on you. So you've got 5 kids through homeschooling.
So I have 5. We started homeschooling during the 8 years that we lived in Toowoomba. So I was brought up in Brisbane in Queensland. We spent 8 years in Toowoomba and started homeschooling then, and then moved back to Brisbane in 2012. The oldest 3 have all graduated. So the 2 girls homeschooled all the way through. My eldest son went to our local high school for year 11 and 12, where he ended up as school captain in his year 12 year. And our 4th child, he's in his final year. He's homeschooled all the way and hoping to head off to university next year. And then our youngest is in, the equivalent of year 10. He's been homeschooled all the way as well.
Oh, well, that's great. And you're up in Queensland, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So let's get on to the subject then, which is tertiary pathways, because each of our kids who were homeschooled went tertiary pathways, and they all ended up getting a degree, and they're now working, and one was in their own business. But what's your experience of tertiary pathways? Tell us how you got involved and what are the tertiary pathways you've found?
Sure. I got involved in this area when my eldest, I think, was in about year 9, and I was starting to think, well, how do I do this? She looked like she was headed towards university. And I started with our local university, which was my alma mater. They have a program where students in year 12 can do one university subject if they're performing academically well enough at school. And I wanted to know, well, how could my home educated student do that? And sent copious emails, and they didn't really have very good answers. And basically they agreed to sort of let her be a bit of a guinea pig, I guess. And she did that and did really well. She also did a similar thing at another university, and that was part of her pathway to university. But then after becoming involved in the Queensland advocacy team, that became an area that, I just became interested in a little bit more, wanting to make sure there was equity for home educated students. And so I've been steadily working away over the last couple of years trying to get some equity for home educated students to access those programs students can do while in school. So usually you're in year 11 and or 12.
All right. Well, I might just interrupt you then, because you're saying that you've got experience through your own personal need with your own kids, and that was the same for my wife and I. So I might get you to summarise, just so that people can get a big picture view of what are the pathways. Like in our experience, we had 3 kids and we had 3 different pathways. So could you summarise for us, before we get into more detail, what are the pathways that you found?
Sure. Okay. So if I back up, So tertiary obviously means, to do with being the third. So we have primary, which is the first education, secondary being, the second level, so what we would call high school here in Australia, and then tertiary is education beyond that. So that would include both vocational education and training, which you may see abbreviated as VET, usually all in capital letters, which is more your trade, your skills-based, hairdressing and becoming a aged care worker, things like that, or your academic pathway, which is university, which leads you to a professional degree. So those are the two, your vocational education and training or your university pathway. With your VET options, most of so each state is different I know they're different in their TAFE, how they operate and what things are available to students who are home educated. So I can only speak from Queensland, so I encourage people to just take what they hear from me, and if they live in another state, to actually check with their TAFE in their state. And then you can also do vocational education and training through other institutions as well. So there are things that you can start with that kind of training even while your students are still home educated. So, for instance, in Queensland, they offer something only for students in Year 10, and that's to do with the funding from the government. It has to be for that year. So a trade taster or a skills taster, where they, over a period of about 6 or 8 weeks, they sample a few, I think usually 2 or 3 different trades. So that's one thing that students can do quite young.
That's a vocational education establishment such as TAFE.
Yeah, that's right. So our TAFE Queensland offers that. I don't know if there are equivalents in other states.
Well, there are, because my son went through TAFE. He went through open learning initially, and then he did an apprenticeship through TAFE, and then he did a stat and an exam and got into uni and did his full degree. Yes.
So that's one of the things I'll mention a bit later when I talk about university, is how you can use some of those trade qualifications as a pathway to university study. So the next kind of level up that students can avail themselves of it through TAFE in Queensland, and I think I know at least New South Wales, I believe, has something similar, is TAFE at school. And so that's where a student would go for a day a week and be doing usually a Cert 1 or a Cert 2. So they would actually be learning the theory and the practical component at a TAFE facility. And so students in schools do that, but it's in Queensland, it's quite fine for students who are home educated to do that. And I spent a lot of time last year clarifying with one of the people head up here in Brisbane about how students can do that. And so we now have a pathway for people who are members of the HEA, even if they are not with the home education unit or a school, they can take up that option. And then the final sort of level that you could do while still at school is what's called a school-based apprenticeship or traineeship. And so they are often abbreviated to an SAT, not to be confused with another SAT that I will talk about later. So school-based apprenticeships and traineeships. Traineeship is the lower level, where you're just doing that for a year. apprenticeship is a bit more full on, like you would do if you had finished school. And you do that in combination with still doing school. And so there's the option to do that for students. And so I know a number of home educated students who know, already know that they want to be like a diesel, fitter or something, who will take up that option and be getting some qualifications even whilst they're still continuing home education. So that's a little bit of a summary about the VET that you can do while still in school. Once you've finished school, you're on the same, level playing field as every other student who's, graduated from a regular school. And so you would just be applying the same sorts of ways.
So Samantha, what if you have a homeschool student, you go to ask TAFE, can I enrol for a course, and they say, where's your school certificate or your higher school certificate? What do you say?
As far as I'm aware, that shouldn't be an issue. You would explain that you're been home educated. I know the Queensland government is really pushing vocational training at the moment and offering free courses and things to people was originally people under 25, and now I think it's for a season, it's for people of any age. So generally I think that shouldn't be a problem.
All right, well, just to summarise then, what you've said for Queensland, that was our experience in New South Wales too. So my son went from doing some distance ed with TAFE to doing an apprenticeship, and as long as he could find a builder who would apprentice him, TAFE were fine. My daughter, she went off and applied to go to an agricultural TAFE because she was interested in animals, and they let her in without any school certificate, and you just had to pay the educational fee, and she did her Cert 3. And that led to other things which we'll get to when we talk about university.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. So I think we're both the same. We got in without needing a school certificate.
Yeah. So as I say, I worked with the sort of higher ups in TAFE Queensland this past year and have developed a document that outlines those three options that I've just outlined, the trade and school tasters, the TAFE at school, and the school-based traineeship and apprenticeship. That's on our Tertiary Pathways page on our HEA website. So I'd encourage families to go and look at that. Even if you're not from Queensland, check that out in the Queensland section, and then it will just perhaps give you a little bit more of an understanding and the vocabulary so that if you need to, talk to TAFE in Victoria or Western Australia or something, you'll have a bit more of an idea of what kind of questions you should be asking.
All right, so that's the vocational educational training. Do you want to say anything more about that before we move on to universities?
No, that's probably enough at the moment.
Well, how do you get into university? Because our three kids got there eventually.
Well done.
How did you go?
Yeah. That is just one thing I would say to parents, and particularly if you have, I guess any age, but often, people who they're starting and their kids are just, right at the beginning of their school journey, parents are already stressing about how am I going to get them into university. You do not need to send them to school to get them into university.
Yep. And that's my experience too.
So at the very least, probably a couple of decades ago now, the governments or educational people or whatever structured things so that for every university course there is a essentially like a TAFE pathway into that. So there's always the option to start out and do a cert and then a diploma and use that as your stepping stone into a university degree. So at the very least, your child can get there, even if it takes them a couple more years after finishing school. However, that has not needed to be the case. So my eldest has gone to university. My second one has not. He went to school, but he's gone and he's working as a jackaroo out in northwest Queensland and loving it. And my daughter did a university subject. My next daughter down, my third child, she did a university subject whilst in high school, but then chose to work coming straight out of school. So she's been working since then. But number 4 is hopefully headed to university next year. So he's put in his application. And so anyway, I'll talk through some of the options. So a great thing to make use of are those school programs, what I would call school programs. So they are programs that most universities offer where students who are high achieving can do one or more subjects during their senior years. Not all universities necessarily have a pathway or protocol for how home educated students can do that, because you don't necessarily have something to show that they are a B plus, B average or whatever the university demands. And that's something I've been working with universities in Queensland here to make sure there are some established protocols, and we're just on our final one who is very open to it, but having to just work through all the bureaucracy. And I'm really happy to liaise with other parents and kind of show them what I've done with my advocacy work so that they can do the same if their university doesn't have a protocol and they want to get their child.
So you're willing to volunteer your time as a contact?
Absolutely, okay. Very much so. So I don't have the time to contact all those universities myself, but if you know that your local university has a program and there's not a clear pathway, I'm happy to lend my experience and clout in that regard.
Thank you. And could I just add in that in our experience, because our 3 kids went very different ways, we learnt that if you go to the university open day, you wriggle around and ask questions, and there's people, in our case, were called registrars, and their job at the university was to do admissions. And you go to them and you say, we're a homeschooler, and they know quite a lot about that, and you ask them, we're interested in XYZ course, here's our son or here's our daughter, what's the way in? And they are super helpful to say, oh, well, for that course in our university, do this. And in one case, it was our daughter, she just actually enrolled in one subject, and once she could prove that she passed a subject, they said, okay, she's obviously able, and on she went.
Wow, that's fantastic.
But with the other, they said, oh, well, for your son, he needs to sit a test just to show that he has the capability, and then we will let him in. So 2 different pathways, but all by talking to the registrar. So have you talked to people at university?
I have talked to people in the admissions team, probably only really through email and the phone, and I haven't found them that helpful. So perhaps that's a good tip. Perhaps the in-person
at the open days.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'll file that one away and add that to the toolbox. But you make a good point about the tests that you can do. So there's 2 main tests, and these seem to be the main ones that open up the pathway for students to do these school programs. So I would recommend parents looking into these. So my children have done the STAT, the Special Tertiaries Admissions Test.
Yeah, that's what ours did.
It's a multiple choice test that covers basically verbal reasoning and sort of mathematico-spatial scientific reasoning. You can't study for it. You can do a sort of a scaled down practice test for it, but it's not.
That's what I was going to say. I think we paid $90 to a private company who let you do some practice tests, and that definitely helped, because at least the student goes in knowing what to expect, and they don't freeze and freak out. And so we found that you can do a shorter version just for free that you can print off and do it online and do at home. And I just figured, okay, well, it was this percentage of the questions of the real one, so we'll do that percentage of the time, and had the whole timed tested experience, and I think that was important. My children who'd done that had also done my girls had both done NAPLAN, and so they had some experience of sort of timed testing. But if they haven't done any sort of time testing before, that is helpful to definitely have that experience. But it's not a really complicated test. If you've got bright enough kids who are headed towards university, they should. Well, one of our kids didn't do all that well in it. He passed, but he didn't do very well. But fortunately, it was well enough to get into the course he wanted to do. So I'm just giving hope to people who might be not the top achievers, but just the average.
Absolutely.
Which is
That's
one
a
of
good
ours
point.
came through the trade background and he was okay, but it was a struggle.
Yes,
But he got
that's
there.
right. The other test is the SAT. I think that's the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which if you've been immersed in the home education world, for long enough, you've probably, and aware of what, things from America, they often talking about SATs. And so there are different kinds of SAT tests. So the one that I'm referring to is similar to the STAT. It's a general multi-choice kind of test. You can do SATs in specific subject areas, which are more like sitting a high school or university exam and that. But yeah, we're just talking about the SAT. And so the Queensland universities that we've worked with, they have established a score for the SAT or the STAT that students need to reach to be able to get into those courses. But those tests themselves, most universities will take those as a standalone admission into their course.
That was our experience too.
So it does depend very much on the university. So, for instance, some universities won't allow it until you're, say, 21. The University of Queensland, which is fairly close to us, they accept it after you're 18. But for my daughter, that would have meant that she couldn't have started till her second semester.
Okay.
Because she was only turning 18 in what would have been her first semester. So we had to augment with some other things. So the STAT results contributed to her ranking, her ATAR, but they weren't the only qualification that was sort of getting her in.
So what other qualifications did they need? Because in our case, one of our kids was working for a vet. She went through Cert 3 through TERF in sort of animal work. She was working with a vet. In the end, the reference from the vet was one of the things that went into the university application. So actually a reference was useful too, work experience.
So in my eldest daughter's case, it was the fact that she had done some of these subjects while at school. And so one thing I've only just figured this out this year. And this is true for Queensland, so I cannot speak for other states, but you could talk to whichever body in your state oversees tertiary rankings and find out what the deal is, what you need to do there. But I imagine it's probably similar. So here in Queensland, you need to have done, if you've done 2 university subjects or courses from the same university, then your GPA is converted into a ranking. So my daughter had happened to have done 2 through the University of Southern Queensland. She was then had a ranking through that, which also then went with her STAT results and gave her her ranking, which was sufficient for her to be offered a place at her top choice, which was a different university to those 2, before her peers, who were at school had even received their their rankings kind of a month later or something. So.
Well, that's so interesting hearing you say that. It makes me feel we got off light. One of our daughters got into University of Canberra without having to do the STAT. She just did microbiology as a course off the back of the veterinary stuff. And then her result in that was sufficient for them to say, okay, you can now go in and do general nursing and become a registered nurse. So she got in off one course.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So as I say, it does vary from state to state what they will allow in terms of rankings, but also each university. So I really second your comment, Michael, about talk to the admissions people at the university your student's interested in attending and find out what is required there. And if you find that they can't get into their top pick, but they can get into another university, well, sometimes that's a good option. They can do that, do a year there and transfer to their preferred university.
I can really endorse that. In fact, can I just change the subject for a minute? You're talking about talk to the university. It means you've got to think ahead a little bit, doesn't it? So I'd be very interested to compare notes, my experience versus yours. How far ahead do you have to think about this? The timing of it.
Yeah. Look, the earlier the better, but also if you're only thinking about this, you know, when your student's kind of about to graduate, there are still options. It might mean you have to take a little bit longer to get there. But if you're starting to think about this when they're in year 9 or 10 and showing signs that they might like to head to university, that's great, because that will help you to be better prepared.
Yep.
So you don't need to think about it when they're in primary school,
No.
but once they're, you know, hitting that sort of year 9, 10 level and you think, university could be an option. I think they're wired, you know, this way. That's good time just to start doing your research, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to start doing something. You know, they don't have to start studying a university subject in year 9 or a TAFE course in year 9, but it means you're getting prepared, and it will just make your journey as a parent less stressful in supporting them.
All right. Our experience with timing was that, like you, around year 9, it's a really good time to be thinking, what do I want to do? And because you're homeschool and you're available, it's amazing how much easier it is to get into work experience, because you can go at a time that suits the employer.
Yeah.
And so our kids got different work experience, and so then they started to think what they wanted to do. And then once they thought what they wanted to do, even though my son changed at the last minute, which is interesting, you then work out what's the pathway for the thing I want to do. It's different to get into law, to getting into nursing, to getting into economics, to getting into building. They're all different. So once you pick kind of the stream you want to go, then we noticed with the universities, they have open days, but their open days are timed to their admissions system, and so our open days typically were around September. And it was so interesting, by participating with what we thought was the chosen pathway and talking to the registrars and getting on board with that uni and doing the stat test. We never knew this was going to happen, but it meant right at the last minute, because we were engaged with the uni and we'd done the steps for Path A, he actually changed to a completely different pathway in the last 2 weeks. But he couldn't have done that if he hadn't done all the lead-ups. So
yes.
The other thing, irrespective of year 9, is by the time you're heading to uni, I think you've got to watch their admissions system and their open days, and turn up at the open days and say what you're interested in, meet the people and follow their timetable. They have a timetable, and they'll tell you when you need to get stuff done by, and they'll help you through. So in our case, September set us up for February the following year. That was the timing for us.
Yeah. And I know, like Queensland, a lot of them have or here in Brisbane at least, have their open days even in August. So, yeah.
Right.
There's a few other options to get into university. So I mentioned before the TAFE to uni pathways.
Yep.
So if you've done, you know, a certificate, so some students might even do, you know, their school-based traineeship in their year 11 year, so they have a certificate, and then they might opt that their year 12 year is actually doing a diploma through TAFE, and sometimes you can organise that, or it might be that, you know, they still want to be doing things through year 12 at homeschooled, and then go on and do a diploma, and then go on to university that way. And again, talk to the establishments and find out. Talk to the TAFEs, talk to the universities, and find out what's best for what they want to do. Open university is something that I know a number of home educated families make use of. So you pay for that and do the subjects, and that then opens up the pathway to enrol in a particular university, because essentially, like I alluded to before, you've then got university study under your belt, and that's converted into a ranking that you can use for to apply to any university. I think
it's called Open University here in New
That's
South
right,
Wales
Open
too.
University. Yeah, so we haven't utilised that just because I'm a bit of a cheapskate, and I figured we can do things, for less. And so we've made a lot of use of the school program. So my son, who's finishing up this year, he's on his 6th free university subject, because he's done one from all the universities that he can in Southeast Queensland. He was able to do a repeat one at another one and get a scholarship to do that one for free. Generally, the ones that have that program, if you are able to do more than one, you're free for the first one and you pay half price for the second one if you're still in school. So that's a good way. And for him, it's been a bit of a taster. We've chosen that as a way for him to figure out, well, within the whole arts field, does he prefer to do history or English literature or writing or politics? And so, Open University is another way that you can go where you're paying for it. And then there also are university bridging courses. So these are courses that the universities offer. They basically are designed for people who don't have Year 12 qualifications, to equip them with the skills needed to study at a university level. And so this could be people who, dropped out of school early 20 years ago, or it could be somebody who, finished at Year 10 just in the last couple of years and went to TAFE, went and worked and now is thinking, I really want to go to university, but, I need to learn, how do you write university essays and how do you study maths at a high enough level to get into an engineering course or whatever. So those generally have a cost available attached to them. I know TAFE in Queensland has let us know in the HEA about a bridging course that they have, and I cannot remember off the top of my head now whether there's a cost associated with that. That one may potentially be free, but don't quote me on that. But that information is again available on the Tertiary Pathways page on our wonderful HEA website.
All right, thank you. Well, let's summarise what the pathways are and then finish with we'd be very interested in what your experience has been with volunteering with HEA Queensland and advocacy work. So first of all, to summarise, please jump in if I get this wrong, but for what you've said, there is the vocational education system, which is skills-based and competency-based, and you do that through the TAFEs, and you can probably do it through Distant Ed as well. Those are pathways that can lead also into university, but for the university system it's different to vocational education. You have to get through the university admissions, and the sorts of ways in there you can pay for bridging courses, you can pay for Open University, or you can do a STAT test, or you can do the American SAT test, or you can talk to your admissions people and they may have something else you can do too, and then you can get into your university course. Would that be a fair summary?
I think you've done well, Michael.
Okay, thank you. And that you've offered to help people. So this willingness to help, thank you for that. I certainly call you one of our gold volunteers, and all of us in HEA volunteer, Len and I do too. So what's been your experience with volunteering? Are you advocating to government at all? Do you ever talk to education ministers or heads of universities? What do you do?
Yeah, so I started out with the Queensland registration support. So when people contacted us and needed help, with the registration process in Queensland, was very quickly sort of pulled into the Queensland advocacy team. And for the last few years, I've headed up that team. So yes, I do meet with both the management of the home education unit, which is the regulatory body in Queensland. So usually meet with them 3 or 4 times a year. One of our wins as a advocacy team has been to secure annual meetings with the education minister. So prior to my involvement, they had been lobbying for that for a number of years with no success, and we managed to get that. So that's great. As I mentioned, I've also been liaising directly with each of the universities in Queensland about how home-educated students can access their pathways to study while they're in school. And so that's just provides a helpful stepping stone. Once I've sort of ticked that off, probably one of my next goals will be to clarify some of these pathways that we've been talking about. So unis just much more aware and upfront about the pathways for home educated students. And given the growth in home education across Australia, and but particularly in Queensland. I think universities are probably going to start being more open to that.
And we found very friendly registrars and admissions people. When they heard home education, they said, oh, great, they're good self-directed learners. Yeah. Anyway, across to you, Lynn, because I know you were interested in whatever wins had been happening up in Queensland. And with Samantha, have you got any questions about that?
It's really one of those things that at face value, you don't often see all of the hard work that does go in to the advocacy, talking to the government departments and all that kind of stuff. So I really just wanted to ask Samantha, do you have any win in particular that comes to mind that we can share with people to say, you know, this is the extra work that goes on like deep underground in the HEA?
Sure. A couple of things come to mind. So a few years ago, we were able to gain permission, I guess, for families in Queensland to use work samples in their reports that were from subjects that parents hadn't taught. So it used to be kind of not allowed, but now you could include something from a co-op class your child had been doing, or, you know, possibly the piano lessons that they've been getting privately. So that was a win. We've also reduced the number of show cause notices that families are getting. So show cause notices are basically the bit of scary paperwork that comes out to say, please show cause why you should not be deregistered, you know, and that's after parents have put in their report. So we noticed there was an increase. They were saying no, but we've been able to now get access to their data on that. So every quarter when we meet with them, they actually share with us the data. And I think the fact that they know they're being watched has helped them to be really on the ball a bit more in that area. And so interestingly, after we started getting the data, the numbers just plummeted. And that's been, I think, because they've put some practices in place to be more just a bit more gentle. So they will touch base with families and just say, oh, we seem to be missing this piece of paperwork. Because sometimes it's just a piece of paperwork, you know. You thought you'd sent in all 6 samples and turns out one was tucked under a pile of papers on your desk or whatever. And so they'll just call you and be like, oh, okay, right, found that, sent it in. You don't even get the scary piece of paperwork. So, so that's been a win. And I think just to be more directly included in consultation. So the Education Act up here is undergoing review, and the home education portion of that is one of the areas that's been looked at. And so we have been consulted. We were also asked to give input into some research that the education department did into home education. So that's the first bit of research that we know that the government has ever commissioned. And they sought us out as contributors. So I think that's helped. That's been a real win to know that now our voice is getting heard.
And that's a win for not just our members, but our whole homeschooling community, like across the whole of Australia. Absolutely.
So I just think, you know, people don't realise how much they benefit from the home education, even if they are not members. I kind of like to think of us, I'm not particularly a union person necessarily, but I feel like we're a bit like a union for homeschoolers, and we fight to get some of our rights upheld. And, that benefits not just our members, but benefits everybody. And so I would encourage people to consider becoming a member, just a bit of, I guess, as a bit of a way of saying thank you and paying it forward for the next generation to be able to continue on that fight.
That's why I joined.
Important, especially with that working with government departments, because that's part of our education system. If everyone's working together, that's going to be so much easier for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you both. That was an amazing lot of information, Samantha. I have little ones who are still in that primary age, but in the back of my mind, it's still that's something I'm going to have to think about one day, you know, going through the tertiary pathway. So it's kind of nice, even without having kids nearing that age, to listen to all of that information. So thank you so much. Thank you, Michael, as well. And thank you to our sponsor, HAPOW. HAPOW actually team up with some of Australia's leading experts to bring you some of their content or all of their content.